Hello, everyone. My name is Satoshi Nazuka. I am a Japanese patent attorney at Rin Patent International. This session will be hosted by Mr. Epstein and me. Brian, please.
Hi, my name is Brian Epstein, and I am a U.S. patent attorney with Modal PLLC.
Thank you, Brian. In this session, entitled Broad AI, Broad Sword, we will speak about patent applications regarding an AI-related invention. They have been filed in Japan, the US, Europe, and other countries by a Japanese corporation. The application filed in Japan has already been granted a patent, and the US and European applications are now pending. In the JP part of this session, I will explain the contents of this invention and also review the allowed claims of the Japanese patent. In the US part of this session, Brian will provide his thoughts about prosecution strategies for the US application. The title of the patent is Tactile Information Estimation Device, Method for Estimating Tactile Information and Program. This Japanese application was filed in 2018 and the patent was issued in 2019. The owner of this patent is Preferred Networks, which is known as a leading Japanese AI company. This slide shows a brief description of the background of this invention. A machine learning can use several kinds of information, such as visual information, audio information, and motion information. Moreover, information acquired by a tactile sensor can be used for machine learning. When we, human beings, try to grasp an object, we may guess which part of this object is unlikely to be slippery based on its visual information. On the other hand, it is difficult for machine learning to obtain such tactile information from visual information obtained by a visual sensor. This invention has been made to provide an apparatus and method which can estimate tactile information based on visual information for controlling a robot to grasp an object. Then let's review the allowed claims of this Japanese patent. Claim 1 recites that an apparatus for estimating a tactile information comprising one or more memories and one or more processors, wherein the one or more processors are configured to input at least a first visual information of an object which has been acquired by a visual sensor to a model which has been generated based on a visual information and a tactile information linked to the visual information, and extract a feature with respect to a tactile information of the object. The allowed claim 1 relates to an apparatus for estimating tactile information based on visual information using a trained model. As can be seen, the allowed claim 1 of the Japanese patent has a relatively broad scope. Okay. And this slide shows figure 8 of the US application corresponding to the Japanese application. The machine learning model is trained based on visual data about the left side object acquired by a visual sensor, and also based on tactile data about the same object acquired by a tactile sensor. The object on the right side is an object to be grasped by a robot. The robot can obtain tactile information about the object to be grasped by using the trained model. Next, let's review another allowed independent claim. Claim 13 recites that an apparatus for learning tactile information comprising one or more memories and one or more processors, wherein the one or more processors are configured to train based on a visual information and the tactile information linked to the visual information, a model which outputs a feature with respect to tactile information of an object, when at least a visual information which has been acquired by a visual sensor of the object is input to the model. As you can see, claim 13 is about the learning or training phase. On the other hand, claim 1 is about the estimation phase. Similar to claim 1, claim 13 also has a relatively broad scope. This slide shows figure 1 of the corresponding US application. The visual information acquired by the visual sensor and tactile information acquired by the tactile sensor are used as input data to train the model. The visual information and the tactile information are combined or fused during the training of the model, so as to form self-organized visual and tactile features in the model. This slide summarizes the essential features of this invention based on my understanding. The essential features would be the use of visual information and tactile information linked to the visual information as input data for training a neural network model. By training the model based on these input data, it becomes possible to obtain features or representations formed by combining or fusing visual and tactile information. And I think that the autoencoder would be essential for training this model. And the type of the tactile information for the training phase may be different from the type of the tactile information, which is output in the estimation phase. This slide shows major requirements which should be satisfied for obtaining a patent. The Japanese examiner has judged that the claimed invention and the description meet all the requirements shown in this slide. Moreover, 2 post-grant oppositions were actually filed against this Japanese patent, and this patent has survived against the oppositions without any amendment to the originally allowed claims. As you may know, the examination standards for computer-implemented inventions are not harmonized internationally, at least at present. In particular, the examination standards for subject matter eligibility and inventive step considerably vary from country to country. And this slide showed the regulations or guidelines regarding subject matter eligibility in Japan, the US, and Europe. In the US, the MPEP 2106 prescribes the patent subject matter eligibility, which is much stricter than that in Japan due to the famous Mayo and Alice cases. In Europe, the EPO examination guideline G, Part G, Chapter 2 prescribes the subject matter eligibility. According to this EPO's guideline, if a term, computer or the like, is included in a claim or an invention, the invention is considered to have subject matter eligibility. Therefore, the standards for subject matter eligibility in Europe are less strict than those in Japan. Then, as shown in this slide, we can say that the hurdles of subject matter eligibility would be the highest in the US and the lowest in Europe, and in Japan, they are between. This slide shows the regulations or guidelines regarding the inventive step in Japan, the US, and Europe. In Europe, there is a provision in the EPO examination guideline, Part G, Chapter 7, 5.4, entitled Claims Comprising Technical and Non-Technical Features. According to this provision, if a claim contains both technical and non-technical features, the inventive step can be established based on only the technical features, not on the non-technical features. Like this, in the EPO, non-technical features of an invention cannot be used as a basis for establishing inventive step, so that the hurdle for inventive step is high. Regarding Japan, the US, the grant rate of AI-related inventions in Japan is 80% or more. Then the hurdle for inventive step in Japan would be lower than that in the US. Generally speaking, it would be desirable to obtain a patent with broad claims. However, the broader the claims are, the higher the risk of their invalidation is. For example, inventive step of a patented invention could be denied in patent litigation due to a new prior art reference, which was not found during the prosecution. Moreover, a litigation court may judge that allowed claims are too broad to satisfy the support requirement or the like. Accordingly, a patent with broad claims may be so-called double-edged sword. However, how broad is too broad? The answer to this question would vary country to country. Typically, the hurdle for subject matter eligibility is very high in the US. Then, are there any tips for appropriately obtaining a patent, a US patent for AI-related inventions? Okay, then let's ask a competent US patent attorney having an experience in the field of AI. And if you have any questions or comments about my part of this session, please feel free to contact me. Then, Brian, please share your thoughts about finding strategies in the US for this AI-related invention.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. I think you need to make me, oh, there it is, reclaim host. I'm the host now, okay. All right, so this is my portion for Broad AI Broadsword. Today we'll be taking a look at the current claim set in the United States and considering ways in which we can take action today to try to promote prosecution. So as it stands, this application currently includes 7 independent claims spread across 3 different sets. The first set of claims pertains to the estimation model, which will eventually turn out to be a subcombination of independent claims 1 and 14. There are independent claims directed to a training model in claims 13 and 21. And there's also a set of claims directed to an estimation model with an end effector. And these are the combination claims roughly corresponding to this previous subcombination. These claims are set forth in claims 22 and 30 through 31. So we want this preliminary amendment to minimize the impact on the applicant's current claim set So we're going to propose adding new claims, not amending the existing claims. However, first, because a restriction seems proper, we're going to cancel some claims to avoid fees for adding our new claims. So a restriction in this case could be based on either the different claim sets themselves or on the embodiment set forth in the specification. So if it's the examiner restricts based on claim sets, it would probably be broken up as 1 through 12 and 14 through 20, claims 13 and 21, or claims 22 through 34. If the examiner issues a restriction based on the specification, then the restriction would be broken up as embodiments, 1 through 4. So for our discussion today, we are going to restrict consideration to claims 1 through 12 and 14 through 20, corresponding to embodiment 3. So if you've read the application, the question is going to be, Brian, claim 1 clearly finds some support in embodiment 1. So why are we not selecting embodiment 1? And the answer is that claims 1 through 12 appear directed to using this model, but the use in embodiment 1 does not appear to be sufficiently inventive. So we're planning ahead by choosing embodiment 3 here instead of the more difficult prosecution of embodiment 1. So we'll look at how to construct this preliminary amendment. So we're going to cancel claims 13 and 21 through 34. These would be the withdrawn claims. And this potentially gives us 5 additional independent claims and 14 additional total claims for which we would not need to pay governmental claim fees. So we're going to propose adding 3 independent claims: a computer readable medium, right? This is a so-called Beauregard claim, a means plus function claim, and a step plus function claim. Step plus function claims are basically just the method equivalent of a means plus function claim. Now we're going to safely add 2 dependent claims for each of our 5 independent claims, right? We have claims 1 and 14 are independent claims. We just added 3 new independent claims. So we're adding a total of 10 dependent claims, which gives us a total of 13 new claims. So there's no government fees for what we're proposing. And to make these dependent claims effective, we're going to attempt to address potential grounds of rejection. So what are these grounds? So I've identified 3 on this slide. On the right side of the slide, you can see the current version of claim 1. It's a little bit broader than the allowed Japanese claim. And the 3 grounds that I've identified are eligibility under section 101 as being directed to an abstract idea, enablement under 112A, and anticipation under 35 USC section 102 by the NODA non-patent literature. NODA is cited in this corresponding Japanese application as a prior art reference. I didn't search for it on my own. However, if you look at the American publication, you'll see that the American Council deleted the citation to the NODA reference from the US specification. But, savvy practitioners and examiners know that, you can probably just look at the corresponding Japanese application and find this information. We're actually going to consider the 101 and 102 rejections together. So without constructing the entire rejection, this claim could be considered to be a mental process, even though it recites memories and processors. And the reason is that the claims can recite a mental process even if they are claimed as being performed on a computer. All right. Eligibility under section 101 is tremendously complicated and well outside of our focus today. But, the postcard length version of 101 is that we want to clarify the inventive concept in the claims. And so let's consider the section 102 rejection as part of that. And so if we look at this NODA reference, we'll see that in section 5.1 on page 729, the reference describes that the image compression network inputs raw RGB bitmap images acquired from a camera and outputs the corresponding feature vectors. And so if you compare this to the claim on the right side of the slide, you'll see that there are some similarities, except that there's this recitation in our claim about tactile information. But the issue is that under American practice, the phrase tactile information is too broad. That could be anything. Your examiner can tell you that the word tactile is just a label that's being given to it. And there's nothing inherently tactile about it. It could just be a 1 or a 0. And so we need to clarify, what this tactile information really is or what it does. And so what we're going to want to do is overcome the art rejection by amending towards the inventive features. Okay. The reason is to avoid design choice rejections under MPEP section 2144.046C. This rarely comes up in office actions, but comes up very frequently during interviews. And so it's always in the back of the examiner's head, right? This is where US patent law follows the rest of the world in looking for an invention, not just a combination of features. And so, this sounds a bit different than the eligibility guidelines, but frequently, frequently, art rejections are overcome differently than eligibility rejections. But sometimes we have a choice between amending 2 different ways or amending 1 way. And it's more efficient to amend 1 way, right? We don't want to create an unnecessarily narrow amendment or, unnecessary estoppel in any sense. And in this case, we can do that. We can amend, both to overcome a potential eligibility rejection as well as the potential anticipation rejection in the same direction. So on this slide, you can see the first proposed dependent claim, claim 35. And so we're proposing to add a gripper to grasp the object, wherein the feature amount represents a relationship between slipperiness and hardness of the object. The 1 or more processors are further configured to estimate a property of the object based on this slipperiness and hardness. And then ultimately, the gripper grasps the object based on this property. So this seems to overcome the 101 rejection because there's a streamlined eligibility test discussed in MPEP section 2106.06. And this test specifically mentions control systems for robotic arm assemblies. And so this gripper sounds a lot like a robotic arm. So, it looks like we can pretty clearly cruise through the 101 analysis. And in addition, the NOTA reference does not teach anything about the slipperiness or the hardness of the object. So again, this seems to, pretty clearly distinguish over at least our proposed art rejection. All right, let's look at enablement. So the issue that I identified here is that the specification must teach one skilled in the art how to make or use the full scope of the claimed invention. And the issue is that our claim is not limited to use of any particular model, right? It's just a model that's generated based on visual information and tactile information. And as we discussed in the US, that could be basically any information. And so if we look at the specification, which part of this disclosure enables extracting a feature amount from an input of any visual information, right? It's just too broad. There's this machine learning aspect that's in the specification that's not limiting the independent claims here. And so the proposed dependent claim here is actually dependent on the previous claim. It made the most sense to present it that way. And now the 1 or more processors are further configured to decide a grasp force with which the gripper grasps the object based on the feature amount. The visual information is an image of the object, and the model is a neural network model. So we're really trying to limit it to like the specific embodiments that are described in the application here. And the issue is that we're basically trying to inferentially claim the training model, right? And the reason is that our enablement issue kind of relates to that, right? We have to have a specific model that's trained a certain way. That's not really in the current claims. But the issue is also that we want to avoid divided infringement, right? We don't want to claim too much about the how the model's trained. And so this claim is trying to dance around that subject, try to address it without approaching it directly. So now you've seen my dependent claims. And so the logical question is, Brian, are these new dependent claims allowable? And the answer is, I have no idea. Possibly not. Maybe even probably not. And that's okay. In US prosecution, dependent claims are best used as guideposts, not as destinations, right? My goal is not to set forth allowable subject matter. My goal is to set forth a way in which the applicant can see how the examiner is considering particular features and, maybe amend in a particular direction, maybe significantly more, maybe just a little bit further. It's just a guidepost pointing a direction. And the reason is that this distinction relates to procedural concerns. In particular, for those of you that know it, the examiner count system, as well as potential applicability to litigation, as well as other features. There's a lot going on in this decision here. But in a nutshell, it's easy to amend one step more than a rejected dependent claim to reach an allowance, right? Maybe claim 35 is almost there, but not quite, and we can just add a little bit more to overcome the reference and reach an allowance. On the other hand, if claim 35 is itself allowable, it's pretty difficult to amend one step less than an allowable dependent claim and still reach an allowance, right? We don't know what that extra step was or what got very close to an allowance but didn't reach it, or that would still reach an allowance rather. And so it's a little bit easier on the prosecution if we get close to an allowance but don't quite reach it, as opposed to reaching it and then having to try and pursue a broader claim on the part of our applicant. And so those are my suggestions for the preliminary amendment here. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and here's my contact information. Thank you very much. I hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much, everybody.